Tears of the Kingdom is a truly incredible game, one that I'm enjoying significantly more than Breath of the Wild, and one that I think reaches some truly incredible heights. And inevitably, I'll write many scripts for many videos praising Tears for the many ways in which it is incredible. But as excellent as it is, and as much of an improvement over Breath of the Wild as I see it, I also think that Tears of the Kingdom has many flaws. It just so happens that the game's flaws pale in comparison to its triumphs. However, one specific aspect of the game stands out as a genuine disappointment to an otherwise excellent game that I do consider to be significant. The weakest part of Tears of the Kingdom, by a significant margin, is the aspect on which it was marketed the most, and that is unfortunately the sky. The Sky Islands are simply too few in number, not interesting enough to explore, and too repetitive. I want to clarify that of course this is just my opinion, and if you had a great time with the Sky Islands, I'm very happy for you. I wish I felt the same, and I hope that you'll hear me out before leaving a comment. Just a quick word describing spoilers, we will be talking about the opening of the game, and we will be using footage from some islands you may not have found yet, as well as using a couple clips of some of the treasure you find, so if you want to be completely surprised by Tears of the Kingdom's Sky Islands, maybe check this video out down the line. When Tears of the Kingdom opens and we finally emerge from the cave in which we lose to Ganondorf and the Sky Islands present themselves before us, one can't help but feel as though an entirely new realm has opened before us. And the sky does start off so strongly. The Great Sky Island is excellent. It is the perfect replacement for the Great Plateau as a tutorial section. It's a lot of fun to explore, and just like the Great Plateau, it is trivially easy to spend dozens of hours here before you even think of advancing to the rest of the game. The Great Sky Island is cleverly designed, it's full of life with diverse flora and fauna, as well as a number of NPCs in the form of the Steward constructs and the Ghost of Raru. There are a number of clever and out-of-the-way optional areas, including a boss fight, and overall it's a great first impression for the sky that leaves you wanting more. And then you proceed to never get anything like it ever again. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit. You do get access to a handful of pretty cool and comprehensive islands, like the labyrinths, but these fleshed out islands are a fraction of what's up there, and the vast majority of the rest of it is just not very impressive. They pale in comparison to the Great Sky Island. And on one hand, that would seem to make sense. After all, the Great Sky Island is specifically meant to be a special tutorial island, so naturally it would be thorough and expansive. But here's the thing, the Great Sky Island is meant to be the new Great Plateau. In terms of quality, I think it definitely succeeds in this, but the difference comes in when you leave these respective areas. When you finish the Great Plateau and enter Hyrule, there were many areas you could explore that had a similar design ethos and level of quality as the Great Plateau. You could just pick a direction and walk, and before long you'd arrive in an area that was well designed and handcrafted, maybe not quite to the same degree as the Great Plateau, but pretty close. However, with the Great Sky Island, that simply isn't the case. You can enjoy your time in the Great Plateau and leave knowing you'll find other areas like it, but the Great Sky Island is really the only island designed for the express purpose of exploration. The vast majority of the rest of the islands have a single, maybe two purposes, and are sort of just meant to be visited once and then never returned to. The Great Sky Island is the only island designed with that much thoroughness. Nothing else even comes close. Part of the reason for this is because the Sky Islands have a massive problem with being hugely repetitive. The Sky Islands can be loosely and vaguely broken into a couple of different types. The most common type of Sky Island, and by far the most boring, are those small floating plus-shaped sections that can be found littered across the sky in every single region. They almost never have anything interesting on them aside from perhaps a construct or two to fight. I think they literally just exist as landing platforms to navigate the sky a bit easier when you don't have much energy at the start of the game, which would be fine if it weren't for the fact that there simply aren't that many islands, and as a result these little floating empty chunks hugely outnumber everything else. But because there's a once in a blue moon chance of something interesting being there, you are tempted to explore them all anyways, which just leads to a lot of tedious monotony and boredom. These plus islands also come in the form of much larger islands, which also have a bit more going on. These islands will often have glider rails and zonai gacha machines. as well as often holding a shrine. However, these shrines are unique in that they don't have an internal puzzle to solve. Rather, a crystal needs to be brought to them from another island, and the player has to figure out how to get the crystal from one island to another. These types of islands are certainly more rewarding than the smaller, basically barren plus-shaped islands. Solving the crystal puzzles can be fun, and the chance of new Zonai parts always makes running into a new machine for the first time exciting. But the biggest issue with them is that there's just a ton of them, sometimes more than one in a region, and they all look indistinguishable, which is a recurring complaint in this video. The islands which hold the crystals are an improvement. Each one is unique and interesting, and the means by which you retrieve the crystal is unique every time. But although there is some diversity, one can't help but feel a sense of deja vu as they start seeing the exact same hollow log and ruined pillar model over and over again. These islands provide some diversity, but they can still be dealt with in a matter of minutes, and don't provide a substantial amount to the Sky Islands overall. These islands I like to call, for a lack of a better term, Oasis Islands. They're pleasing enough to stumble upon the first time. They are very pretty after all. I haven't found any practical use for them in regards to Korok seeds or puzzles, although I might just not have been looking hard enough, and it seems as though they primarily exist for the harvesting of resources, namely ancient fish, sundelions, and fairies. A pleasing location to encounter the first time, but again, the issue is that they are reused over and over again. Finding your fourth Oasis Island is significantly less exciting than finding your first, since they have only the slightest variation from region to region. Though a couple of these massive landmark floating spheres do have some diversity in both visuals and activity on the inside, they all look the same on the outside. And on the inside, they tend to just be shrine, crystal, and gachapon holders. The moments in which you find the interior serving as part of a puzzle are enjoyable exceptions to an otherwise fairly samey island type. There are many types of islands that do have a decent amount of depth, primarily the unique ones, of which each area tends to have at least one. These are your labyrinths, your floating coliseums, your towering skydive challenges. They are often large and interesting to explore, and quite often tend to be rewarding in a way other than just providing shrines and Korok seeds. These islands tend to be quite large and often very high up, so navigating to them can be difficult and rewarding. These islands are generally excellent, and in my opinion they should have been the bread and butter of Tears of the Kingdom. They are rewarding to explore, they all look extremely different from one another, they cut a striking silhouette, and they are island exploration at its best. However, the unfortunate reality is that these types of unique, non-repetitive islands are tragically few in number. The island count overall is pretty small, and these types of islands make up an even smaller number. At best, you only really have one, maybe two of these big, interesting islands per region. Then you'll have a couple crystal puzzle islands paired with a couple large pluses, an oasis or two, and an absolute ton of the barren and empty little islands. What is even more frustrating is that you will often run into islands that appear to be actually quite large and expansive. A certain one even evokes feelings of Great Sky Island in terms of its size. And it can be exciting to make visual of these islands and make your way to them. However, the unfortunate reality is that these are plot-related islands, and while they can be fun to preemptively explore, there often isn't really much to actually do at them until the relevant questline is activated, since navigating them tends to be reliant on champion abilities. So finding them can be really cool at first, and then a bit of a letdown after the fact. What this ultimately means is that when you explore the skies of a new region, there are only actually 2, maybe 3 sky islands worth checking out, since the rest are going to most likely be repetitive clones of other islands, simply there to take up space. You might want to visit them to activate shrines or check out gachapon machines, but that's about it. And when you consider how few sky islands there are overall, having islands there to just fill up space seems like a really bad idea. For me personally, the most exhausting element is this repetitiveness. I understand if this isn't something that bothers you, but it is utterly deflating to me to put in the hard work to get to a new island only to find out that it's a slight variation of a dozen other islands. Why do the sky islands not have different biomes of their own? Clearly that's something that can happen, as we see in the Great Sky Island, or at the very least, why can't they just look a little different? Visual variation seems to be exclusively saved for the islands related to the main story, and everything else is just the same golden fields, white ruins, and hollow tree trunks over and over and over again. I hate using this word in relation to game development, but it does honestly feel a little bit lazy. And this tireless repetition is exacerbated by just how few islands there actually are. While I definitely prefer there to be many islands, I would happily give up quantity if it meant quality. If Nintendo wanted to have a smaller amount of islands so they could give each one more attention, that would be totally understandable to me, and I would have been happy they made that decision. But instead, they just kind of chose the worst option in both fields. There are very few islands, and they are very low in variation. The entire Sky Realm just kind of feels undercooked. And what kind of makes matters worse is that there honestly isn't much to find on the vast majority of them. The bigger, unique islands that we mentioned will have some pretty fantastic rewards, but they're so few in number that they'll make up a small percentage of your time in the sky if you intend to explore every island. On the rest of them, you can expect shrines to solve, some Korok seeds here and there, constructs to kill for Zonai charges, and Sundelions to pick. That pretty much describes 85% of the islands. And that isn't terribly different from ground exploration. A lack of interesting rewards was a huge part of my issue with Breath of the Wild's exploration, and it's something I think they have done a great job of fixing in Tears of the Kingdom, but in the Sky, it seems like they've fallen onto old habits. Even the enjoyable aspects of island exploration tends to quickly become obsolete, pretty much as soon as you can auto-build a reliable vehicle. The very act of figuring out how to get to an island can be an entertaining puzzle until you have a vehicle that can get you from the ground to the sky effortlessly. Finding crystal shrines can be fun, and solving a method to get a crystal to its shrine can be an enjoyable puzzle. But as soon as you build a reliable flying vehicle, both the act of flying to islands where the crystals are held, as well as transporting the crystal to its shrine, become totally trivialized. At this point, variation becomes the only enjoyment, and since that is found sparingly, exploring the islands starts to become a chore. And one might be tempted to make the argument that obviously this is the case, it's the same with enemies. As you get stronger weapons, combat becomes easier. But the problem with the Sky Islands is that it is just not very long until you can build a reliable flying machine, so unless you purposefully handicap yourself and refuse to build a competent flying machine, traversing the islands is going to become trivialized very quickly. And even if you do decide to hamstring yourself just to make exploration more interesting, all that means is that you are cannibalizing a different game mechanic in Ultrahand for the sake of making sky travel more interesting. And if I may be so bold as to say, I don't think that's particularly good game design. And as I alluded to earlier, the most baffling part of this entire problem is that the Sky Islands had such a heavy emphasis in marketing. The depths were just about avoided entirely, despite the fact that, in my opinion, they are significantly more interesting than the Sky Islands. It's very curious to me that Nintendo based the identity of Tears of the Kingdom around an aspect which was ultimately pretty undercooked, and completely hid the underground mechanic, which I think actually had a fair amount of, pardon the pun, depth to it. Sure, the depths can also be a little samey, but at least the fauna has a decent amount of variation, there is more than a single enemy type to engage, and there is a decent variety of things to find and activities to partake in. It also seems as though the depths had a lot more handcrafted attention paid to them compared to the islands, which honestly feel tacked on. I know that might be harsh, but that's honestly how I think the best way to describe my feelings towards the Sky Islands are: tacked on. And the whole thing just leaves me really confused. Like, it had to be a purposeful choice for Nintendo to accept so much repetition in the Sky Islands, despite the fact that that doesn't really exist anywhere else. Like, I've heard it argued that the caves have a fair amount of repetition too, and that is true to a degree, but when I see a new Plus Island in the distance, I know exactly what it's going to look like. It's just a matter of which part the Gachapon machine is going to be on and which part the shrine is going to be on. While at least with the caves, there is going to be some level of difference inside. Nintendo very much could have diversified the islands a lot more if they wanted to. It was a decision for them not to. Whether that decision was based on time is something that we'll never know unless they choose to talk about it. Perhaps their focus did go to the depths, and that's what led to the Sky Islands being so underutilized, but ultimately I just find it to be the case that Nintendo didn't really seem to try that hard in making Sky Islands interesting. And this is not just disappointing because I was looking forward to the island so much, but it was also disappointing because this is the 4th time that Nintendo has tried and failed to make interesting islands. We first saw islands in Wind Waker, and while I personally don't actually think they are that bad, they are a sore spot for most people who find them to be pretty repetitive, with many of the extra islands simply being unexplorable until you found a needed item, which leads to a lot of backtracking. Islands were obviously also a fundamental part of Phantom Hourglass, which was honestly probably the best version of the concept, hilariously enough, since the core of the game was just island hopping. But all the same, they were still pretty bare bones. We got the notoriously poor Sky Islands in Skyward Sword, the first Zelda game to explore the idea of floating islands, with the islands themselves unfortunately being extremely scarce and utterly devoid of interest with few exceptions. And now we have Tears of the Kingdom, which continues the pattern of having boring islands that don't really have much purpose. It is so weird to me that the Zelda team is so latched on to the idea of discovering islands, be it in the ocean or in the sky, to the point where they reuse the idea over and over again, but they seemingly refuse to learn from their mistakes or further develop on the idea past the level of mostly bland extra locations with a few interesting exceptions. Breath of the Wild showed that the simple act of exploration can be its own reward, but that only works when the places you are exploring are interesting and handcrafted. When your islands are completely identical, you need a little something more to make the journey worthwhile. It's particularly strange for the Zelda team, who I think have a pretty stellar track record of learning from their mistakes, to just have this weird blind spot when it comes to islands. It feels like they're just ramming their head into the wall over and over and over again in the exact same way, expecting the wall to break every time. Each new Zelda game with islands as a focus continues to make them underdeveloped, uninteresting, and tacked on. And I think that's really sad. It's a huge missed opportunity. Again, Tears of the Kingdom is a really incredible game, and my very next video will be me talking about something I'm very fond of in regards to it. But it was definitely a big letdown for me to finally reach the sky, only to discover that there honestly isn't that much up there to see. I know we always say the journey is better than the destination, but I feel like the destination could just be a little bit more interesting in this case. Think highly of the game delivers in so many other aspects. So what do you think? Do you agree with me the Sky Islands are underbaked and disappointing, or do you disagree and think that they're actually pretty cool? Are you somewhere in the middle? Let me know in the comments down below. If you'd like to support me, you can do so by liking and subscribing, leaving a comment, and sharing the video. You can come follow me on Twitter or join my Discord. And if you'd like to support me directly, you can do so by coming over to Patreon and joining the Subrosian Parade, where you can have a Subrosian of your very own. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe out there. Make sure to bring at least a couple extra battery cells with you if you're trying to reach those boring Sky Islands, because those islands are taller than you think, and it's dangerous to go alone.